The year was 1972. March had arrived cold in Youngstown, Ohio, where steel mill smokestacks pierced the gray sky like accusatory fingers. Ashley Sella worked the night shift at St. Michael's General Hospital, a building that smelled perpetually of boiled potatoes and iodine, where fluorescent lights hummed their anxious song above linoleum floors worn smooth by decades of suffering. She was 28 years old, Polish immigrant blood, third-generation factory town. Her hands, small and precise, had learned to insert IV needles by correspondence course, studying under lamplight after her father's factory shift ended, and the house fell quiet. The nursing certificate hung crooked on her bedroom wall, next to a reproduction of Klimt's The Kiss she'd clipped from a magazine. She grew tomatoes in coffee cans on the fire escape. She read Sylvia Plath in stolen moments between patient rounds. Records indicate she kept a journal. Blue fabric cover. Pages filled with observations that would later be classified as evidence of delusional thinking by men who never read poetry. The hospital corridor stretched long on the third floor, the administrative wing, where few nurses ventured after dark. Ashley had gone there looking for extra gauze. Budget cuts meant supplies were locked in storage rooms that required permission, forms signed in triplicate. She'd learned to navigate bureaucracy the way her mother had learned to navigate ration lines during the Depression. Quietly, efficiently, without drawing attention. The voices reached her before she rounded the corner. Male, 2 of them. Low tones that carried the weight of conspiracy. She stopped. The gauze could wait. Something in the timbre made her spine contract. She'd learned to trust that instinct. The same one that told her when a patient was deteriorating before the monitors showed it. Through the gap in the supply room door, she saw them. Dr. Marcus Klein, chief of staff, white coat pristine, and beside him, a man in an expensive suit she didn't recognize. Between them, an envelope changed hands, not the manila kind used for medical files. This one was thick, cream-colored, the kind that held cash. "The shipment arrives Thursday," the suited man said. His voice carried the flat affect of someone accustomed to transactions. "Same protocol, Ward C patients, the ones nobody visits." Klein nodded. "Batch 17, we'll need the consent forms backdated." "Already done." Ashley's breath caught. Her fingernails pressed crescents into her palms. Ward C, the chronic psychiatric wing. Patients warehoused there were mostly indigent, schizophrenics, the elderly poor with dementia. People the system had decided were disposable. She understood immediately what she was witnessing. Clinical trials, unauthorized. The pharmaceutical companies had been circling hospitals like St. Michael's for years, looking for bodies to test their products before FDA approval. Poor bodies. Brown bodies. Bodies that wouldn't be missed if something went wrong. The suited man left first. Klein remained, counting what was in the envelope with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this many times before. Ashley forced herself to breathe, to memorize. The time, 11:47 p.m. The date, March 14th, 1972. The way Klein's wedding ring caught the light as his fingers moved through the bills. She waited 5 minutes after he left, then 10. Her shift ended at 6 a.m. She had time. In the nurse's locker room, she wrote it all down in her journal. Every detail. The words came out shaking, her handwriting deteriorating into jagged angles. At the bottom of the page, she wrote a single sentence that would seal her fate. "They cannot know that I saw this. But institutions have eyes everywhere. And women who notice too much have always been inconvenient." The next morning, she mailed an anonymous letter to the Youngstown Vindicator. 3 paragraphs, no signature. She used the hospital's own typewriter, not realizing they could trace the font. She thought she was being careful. She thought truth still mattered. She was wrong on both counts. The letter arrived at the Vindicator offices on March 16, 1972, a Thursday. The editor assigned it to a junior reporter named Tom Brennan, who read it twice, underlined 3 sentences, then filed it in a drawer marked unverified. He would later testify that he'd intended to investigate, that he'd been busy with a zoning corruption story, that he hadn't realized the urgency. He was lying. The hospital's legal team had called him within 4 hours of the letter's arrival. A generous advertising contract was discussed. The story died before it lived. But Ashley didn't know this yet. She continued her shifts, watching the third-floor corridor with new eyes. Every closed door became suspect. Every hushed conversation potential evidence. She started arriving 15 minutes early, leaving 15 minutes late, mapping the rhythms of institutional secrecy. On March 19th, she witnessed the first consequence of whatever Klein was orchestrating. Mrs. Kowalski, 73 years old, admitted to Ward C 6 months prior with moderate dementia. Family visits had stopped after the second month. A daughter in Pittsburgh who sent cards but never came. Ashley had checked on her Tuesday night. Alert enough, responsive, able to identify the month, the president, her own name. By Thursday morning, Mrs. Kowalski was catatonic, eyes open but unseeing, pupils fixed and dilated. The chart noted only deterioration consistent with disease progression. New medication regimen initiated per Dr. Klein. No one questioned it. In psychiatric wards, decline was expected. Documentation existed to protect the institution, not the patient. Ashley pulled the medication log. The entries were vague. Experimental anxiolytic, batch 17. No dosage specified, no contraindications listed. Just initials, MLK, that she now recognized as Marcus Klein's signature. She photographed the page with a camera she'd borrowed from her neighbor, a journalism student at Youngstown State. The flash seemed deafening in the medication room. Her hands shook as she rewound the film, tucked it into her bra beneath her uniform. That night, she wrote again, not to the newspaper this time, to the Ohio State Medical Board. 2 pages, single-spaced, documenting dates, patient names, ward numbers. She included the photograph, developed in the student darkroom, grainy but legible. She mailed it from a post office 3 neighborhoods away, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. For 6 days, nothing happened. She began to breathe easier. Perhaps the system would work. Perhaps someone with authority would care that indigent patients were being used as laboratory animals. Then came March 27th, a Monday. Spring still frozen, snow refusing to melt. Ashley arrived for her shift at 10:45 p.m. The head nurse, Evelyn Thorpe, a woman whose face had the texture of boiled leather, called her into the office before she could clock in. Dr. Klein was there. So was a man she didn't recognize, wearing the bland smile of bureaucratic authority. "Miss Sella," Klein began, voice warm as formaldehyde, "we've noticed you've been under considerable stress lately. Missing medication counts, confusion about patient protocols, erratic behavior." Ashley's throat closed. "That's not—" "We have witness statements," Evelyn interrupted, sliding a folder across the desk. "Papers inside. Signatures from nurses Ashley had considered friends. Statements describing paranoia. Claims she'd accused doctors of crimes without evidence. One noted she'd been seen talking to herself in supply closets. Every sentence was a lie. Every signature authentic. "We've arranged for an evaluation," the bureaucrat said, his smile never wavering. "For your own well-being. Just a few days of rest and observation. I don't need—" The office door opened behind her. 2 men in white coats, orderlies, the kind employed not for medical skill but for muscle mass and moral flexibility. "This is for your protection, Miss Sella," Klein said, standing. "You've become a danger to yourself and potentially to patients. The State Psychiatric Review Board has been notified. Temporary commitment, 72 hours for assessment." Ashley tried to run. The physics of the situation made it impossible. The orderlies moved with practiced efficiency. Her arm twisted behind her back, not violently, just firm enough to hurt, firm enough to communicate the futility of resistance. In the hallway, other nurses watched. None spoke. Eyes that had shared cigarette breaks with her now studied the floor tiles with sudden fascination. The ambulance waited at the service entrance, no sirens, no lights. just a white vehicle that could have been transporting laundry or corpses with equal discretion. As they loaded her inside, Ashley screamed one sentence. "This isn't madness. I saw what you're doing." The door slammed. The lock engaged. Through the small window, she watched St. Michael's Hospital recede into the March darkness, its windows glowing like the eyes of something that had just fed. The ambulance drove north, away from Youngstown, toward Syracuse, toward Ashford, toward the place where voices went to die. The Ashford Psychiatric Institute announced itself not through signage, but through silence. The kind of silence that swallows sound before it can form. The ambulance tires crunched over gravel that hadn't been raked in years. Past iron gates rusted into permanent openness, their hinges seized by decades of disuse and indifference. Ashley saw it through the small window. March 28, 1972. 4:17 a.m. A Victorian fortress of red brick and limestone, erected in 1892 when optimism still infected the field of psychiatry. Now it squatted on a hill outside Syracuse like something cancerous, surrounded by pine forests dense enough to muffle screams. 6 stories. Barred windows reflecting nothing. A cupola at the center that might once have been beautiful. The building looked tired, as if it had consumed too many souls and grown bloated with the work. They unloaded her at a service entrance. No main lobby, no reception area with magazines and artificial plants. Just a steel door painted institutional green, chipped at the corners, revealing layers of previous greens beneath. A geological record of neglect. Inside, the smell. Every former patient who later testified mentioned it first. Lysol fighting a losing battle against urine, feces, and something else. Despair, perhaps. Fear sweated through pores and never fully aired out. The ventilation system wheezed asthmatically, pushing the stench from corridor to corridor like a respiratory disease. Nurse Thorpe processed her intake. The woman had traveled separately, arriving before Ashley with the pre-signed commitment papers. Thorpe's efficiency bordered on the mechanical. Empty your pockets. Remove your jewelry. No, the wedding band too. Nothing sharp, nothing personal. Ashley had no wedding band. She handed over a small gold cross her grandmother had given her. Thorpe dropped it into a manila envelope without ceremony. It made a tiny sound hitting the bottom, like something drowning. "Name," Thorpe said, pen poised above a ledger. "Ashley Sella, you know my name, you work with patient number 47219. Ward D diagnosis. Acute hysterical psychosis with paranoid delusions." Thorpe's voice held no inflection. She could have been reading a grocery list. Hair length 5'6", weight 128 pounds. Distinguishing marks, none relevant. The reduction happened that fast. Name to number, person to diagnosis. Identity to inventory. 2 attendants, male, expressionless, necks thick as tree trunks, escorted her through corridors that seemed designed by someone who understood labyrinths. Turn after turn, stairs descending, lights flickering, pipes running exposed along ceilings, dripping condensation that left dark stains on walls pocked with holes that might have been fists or heads. Ward D occupied the basement level, the deepest point, where heat rose from above but never quite arrived, leaving the air perpetually damp and 48 degrees. Where windows existed only as memory, bricked over during some past renovation meant to prevent escapes. The day room held approximately 40 women. Ashley counted later, when her mind could process counting again. Some sat motionless in chairs whose vinyl upholstery had split and been repaired with duct tape. Others shuffled in circles, mapping infinity on linoleum squares. One woman stood facing the wall, forehead pressed against brick, whispering numbers in descending order from 1,000. All wore identical gray smocks, cotton, thin, no pockets, no drawstrings, nothing that could be fashioned into hope or weapon. An attendant handed Ashley hers. "Change, here. There's no privacy screen." The laugh was short, cruel. "Privacy's for people, sweetheart. You're a patient now." She changed, facing the wall. Behind her, 40 pairs of eyes watched or didn't. The smock hung loose, the fabric scratched. No undergarments permitted. The institutional reasoning, suicide prevention. The actual purpose, humiliation. Remind them they own nothing. Not even the body they inhabit. A voice beside her, barely audible. Don't drink the water after lights out. Ashley turned. The woman was young, perhaps 25. Hispanic features. Eyes that had seen too much and recorded it all with the precision of someone who knew documentation was survival. What? The water, after 9 p.m. They add something. Makes you compliant. The woman's lips barely moved. Prison rules applied here. My name was Rosa. Now I'm 39107. Diagnosed nymphomaniac. Real crime. Reported my priest for touching altar boys. Ashley's breath caught. How long? 17 months. There's a woman upstairs, Ward C, been here 9 years. Diagnosed hysteric. Real crime. Witnessed her husband's business partner embezzle. He had her committed. Kept the company. A hand clamped on Ashley's shoulder. Male. Heavy. No talking between patients. House rules. The attendant's breath smelled like cigarettes and something rotting. You'll learn. He steered her toward a cell. They called them rooms, but cells told the truth. 10 by 8 feet. 1 cot, 1 blanket, 1 bucket. A light bulb behind thick wire mesh. The door had no interior handle. 72-hour observation, the attendant said. Then evaluation. Then we decide how crazy you really are. The door closed. The lock turned. A sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Ashley sat on the cot. The mattress was 2 inches of foam over metal springs. The blanket had someone else's smell trapped in its fibers. The walls were concrete, painted white decades ago. Now gray with time and handprints. She thought about Mrs. Kowalski, about Ward C in Youngstown, about pharmaceutical companies that needed bodies for testing and institutions that needed money for operating. She thought about Rosa. 9 years, 17 months, 72 hours, they'd said. From somewhere above, a scream. Then silence. Then the scream again, weaker. Then nothing. Ashley lay down, stared at the ceiling, counted the cracks. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed. Keys jingled. Footsteps approached, then receded. This was Ashford. This was where inconvenient women came to be forgotten. And Ashley had just become the newest entry in a catalog of erasure. The evaluation occurred on day 4, March 31st, 1972. Dr. Harlan Voss presided, a man whose reputation preceded him like the smell of formaldehyde. 63 years old, graduate of Johns Hopkins, 1933. Studied under physicians who'd practiced lobotomies as casually as dental cleanings. His office occupied the 5th floor, as far from the patient wards as architecture permitted. Ashley sat across from him in restraints, leather cuffs, standard protocol for agitated patients, though she hadn't raised her voice once. Tell me about the conspiracies, Miss Sella. Voss didn't look up from his notepad. His pen moved in scratches that could have been writing or could have been predetermined. There are no conspiracies. I witnessed pharmaceutical testing without consent. I have evidence. Evidence. He wrote something. Your nursing supervisor reports you've been stealing medication logs, photographing confidential documents, harassing physicians with baseless accusations. That's not... I was documenting crimes. Paranoid delusions with persecution complex. His pen scratched faster. Classic hysteria. Female patients of childbearing age often develop elaborate fantasies when professional ambitions exceed realistic. I graduated top of my correspondence program. My evaluations were exemplary. Overachievement masking deep-seated inadequacy. Compensatory behavior. He looked up finally, eyes like whetstones. Miss Sella, your family history indicates instability. Mother experienced postpartum melancholia. Father's drinking, immigrant stress, genetic predisposition to mental fragility. Every word he spoke was extracted from a file she'd never seen, compiled by people she'd never met, shaping a narrative that erased the woman she actually was. I need to speak to a lawyer. I have rights. You signed voluntary commitment papers. I didn't sign anything. Voss slid a document across the desk. Her signature. Perfect forgery or possibly authentic from some hospital form she'd signed months ago. Lifted and transferred. The date read March 27th. The commitment was classified as voluntary self-admission for psychiatric crisis. "You're here because you asked for help," Voss said. "The state is providing that help. When you're well enough to recognize your illness, we'll discuss release." The catch-22 was elegant. Insist on sanity, proof of delusion. Accept the diagnosis, proof of illness. There was no position from which truth could be spoken. "I want to contact my family." Letters are permitted after the observation period. Supervised, naturally. "We can't allow patients to spread their delusions to vulnerable relatives." April 3rd, 1972. They transferred her to the box. Officially, Sensory Regulation Chamber. A therapeutic space designed by Voss himself, described in a 1968 paper presented to the American Psychiatric Association as corrective environmental restructuring for hysterical pathology. In practice, a concrete cell, 2 meters by 3 meters. No windows, no furniture. A drain in the center of the floor. Walls painted white but visible only when the single light bulb, 40 watts, behind wire mesh, was illuminated, which was seldom. The door sealed with a rubber gasket, soundproof. When it closed, the silence wasn't absence of noise. It was presence of nothing. A void that pressed against eardrums until they invented sounds to fill it. Heartbeat becoming thunder, breath becoming hurricane. They fed her twice daily. Oatmeal, gray, lukewarm. Bread that might have been fresh last week. Water in a paper cup that dissolved before she finished drinking. Calories calculated to maintain life, but prevent strength. 800 per day. Malnutrition is medicine. The first week, Ashley counted time by meals. Breakfast meant morning. Dinner meant evening. She exercised, push-ups, squats, walking the perimeter. Kept her mind active reciting poems. Plath. Sexton. I am not what I am. The second week, the light stopped following a pattern. Sometimes on for hours. Sometimes off for what felt like days. Her circadian rhythm shattered. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams bled into waking. She forgot which was which. Week 3, the weight loss became visible. Hip bones protruding, ribs countable through skin. Her period stopped. The body, smart enough to recognize crisis, shut down non-essential functions. Reproduction was luxury. Survival was negotiation. She talked to herself. Not madness. Strategy. The sound of her own voice proved she existed. My name is Ashley Sella. I am 28 years old. I was born in Youngstown. My mother's name is Maria. I like tomatoes. I read Sylvia Plath. But saying it enough times made the words lose meaning, like repeating a word until it becomes just sound. Ashley. Ashley. Ash. Lay. Nonsense syllables. The walls wept condensation. She licked moisture from concrete when thirst became unbearable. The water tasted like rust and old pain. April 28th, day 25. Ashley found it. The wall behind where she slept had a crack. Hairline, barely visible even when the light was on. But her fingers, exploring in darkness, felt it. Felt something else. Paper. Wedged deep into the crack. Old, brittle. She worked it free over hours, days maybe. Time had stopped being linear. When she finally extracted it, held it up to the light during one of the illuminated periods, she saw handwriting. Faded. Blue ink gone gray. A fragment of a letter. Not mad. They say I am, but I am not. Dr. V performed procedure without consent. Cannot remember Tuesday. Pain in skull where they drilled. Others here too. Women like me. We were witnesses. We knew too much. This is not hospital. This is... The text ended mid-sentence. Torn or degraded by time. Ashley's hand shook. Not from weakness. From recognition. She wasn't the first. The box had held others. Women who'd seen what they shouldn't have seen. Known what they weren't permitted to know. How many? How far back did this go? She pressed the paper against her chest. Evidence. Proof. Communion with the ghosts who'd occupied this cell before her. Women whose names had been replaced by patient numbers, whose bodies had been used and discarded. The light went out. Darkness again. Complete. Suffocating. But Ashley wasn't alone anymore. The dead women whispered from the walls. Not supernatural. Just memory. Just the accumulated weight of institutional violence pressing through concrete. She whispered back, "I'll remember you. I'll remember all of us." Outside the box, somewhere in the vast machinery of Ashford, doors opened and closed. Patients screamed or didn't. Doctors made rounds. Files were updated. A system functioning exactly as designed. Inside the box, Ashley Sella began to starve in ways that transcended mere hunger. And the walls kept weeping. And the darkness kept pressing. And time kept not existing. 62 days total. They kept her there 62 days. But she was counting something else now. Not days, not meals. She was counting crimes, filing them in her mind with the precision she'd once used for patient charts. Because if she survived, and survival was no longer guaranteed, someone would need to testify. Someone would need to remember what the institution wanted forgotten. Day 47 in the box, May 19th, 1972. Though Ashley had stopped trusting her own calendar. The mind plays tricks when sensory input reduces to nothing, when darkness becomes default and light becomes anomaly. Her weight, approximately 98 pounds, down from 128. The body cannibalizing itself, consuming muscle for fuel, shrinking inward like a star collapsing. Her mind, fragmenting. But not the way Voss would have diagnosed. She was fragmenting strategically, deliberately, creating separate compartments for different realities. One compartment held the woman she'd been. Ashley, who grew tomatoes, who read poetry, who believed in justice. Another held the patient number 47219, who learned institutional survival. A third held something else, something sharp and observant, recording everything for future testimony. Dissociation as resistance, madness as method. The voices started around day 35. Not hallucinations. Not exactly. More like conversations with absent presences. The women who'd been in this cell before her. She'd found 3 more fragments of writing in the walls. Different handwriting. Different decades, possibly. Fragment 2, behind the drain. Name Catherine Howell, committed 1958. Witnessed embezzlement, state funds, mental health department. They are testing drugs here. Blue pills cause seizures. White pills cause... The text dissolved into water damage. Fragment 3, near the ceiling corner she could only reach by standing on tiptoe. I wasn't sick. Husband wanted new wife. Cheaper than divorce. Doctor friend signed papers. Been here 4 years, Margaret Fisher. If anyone finds this, remember me, remember me, remember. Fragment 4, the most recent, 1968. Lisa Tran, interpreter Vietnamese refugees. Heard military officials discuss massacre cover-up. 3 days later committed. Diagnosis: schizophrenia with violent tendencies. I have never hurt anyone. The violence is theirs. Ashley arranged the fragments in her mind like puzzle pieces, a pattern emerging. Ashford wasn't just a psychiatric institution. It was a disposal system. A place where inconvenient witnesses, whistleblowers, women who knew too much could be legally disappeared. Diagnosed, drugged, erased. The conspiracy she'd glimpsed in Youngstown was larger than pharmaceutical testing. It was structural, systemic. A network of institutions, doctors, officials who used psychiatry as weapon, diagnosis as imprisonment. On day 47, the hallucinations, or visions, or psychotic breaks, or prophetic insights, terminology depended on perspective, intensified. She saw Catherine Howell sitting in the corner, translucent, not quite there, mouth moving soundlessly. Or maybe Ashley's hearing had degraded. She couldn't tell anymore. "They drilled into your skull," Ashley whispered. "I found your note. What did they do to you?" Catherine's image flickered, like old film. Then, lobotomy. Ice pick through eye socket. Doctor? Voss, experimental. Said it would cure my delusions. I died 3 weeks later. Infection. Death certificate said natural causes. I was 34. Real conversation? Trauma-induced hallucination? Did it matter? The information felt true. And later, when Ashley finally escaped and researched, she would find a Catherine Howell in Ashford's records. Admitted 1958. Died 1959. Cause, natural. No family claimed the body. Margaret Fisher appeared next. Older, hair gray, eyes sunken. He got his new wife. I've been here 18 years now. Ward C. I don't remember my daughter's face anymore. The drugs took that. They take everything eventually. Are you alive? Ashley asked. Are you still here? Alive, if you can call it that. Patient 28412. We're not people anymore. We're filing cabinet entries. Lisa Tran materialized last, youngest of them. Vietnamese American. Beautiful even in institutional gray. They gave me electroshock. 27 sessions. Scrambled my memories. I can't testify now even if they released me. I can't remember the names. Can't remember the dates. That's the point. They don't just imprison us. They erase the evidence from our brains. Ashley's tears had stopped days ago. The body had no water to spare for crying, but something inside her contracted. Grief without tears, rage without energy. I'll remember for you, she whispered to the ghosts, real or imagined. I'll document everything. I'll survive this. Catherine smiled sadly. They all say that. The light went out. When it returned, hours, days, the ghosts were gone. Just Ashley and the walls and the accumulated weight of institutional violence. But she'd learned something crucial. The box wasn't designed to drive women mad. It was designed to make them forget. Sensory deprivation eroded memory, weakened the mind's grip on specifics. Can't testify without memories. Can't be a credible witness when your own brain betrays you. Except Ashley had been a nurse. She knew memory techniques, mnemonics, association chains. She spent hours, days encoding information into patterns that sensory deprivation couldn't touch. Dr. Harlan Voss performs unauthorized lobotomies, ice pick through orbital socket, experimental procedures. Nurse Evelyn Thorpe, complicit in fraudulent commitments, witness intimidation, evidence tampering. Director Marcus Klein, pharmaceutical testing without consent. Financial kickbacks, multiple patient deaths. She chanted the information like prayers, like mantras, building neural pathways deeper than the box could reach. May 23rd, day 51. Footsteps outside. The door opened. Light flooded in, blinding after darkness. 2 attendants, one carried a syringe. Dr. Voss says it's time for your treatment, 47219. Ashley's body responded before her mind caught up. Fight or flight. She had no strength for either. They held her down easily. The needle slid into her arm, cold spreading through veins. Thorazine, one attendant said. High dose. You'll sleep for a while. Dream nice dreams. The drug hit fast, reality softening at the edges. The ghosts returning, more solid now. Catherine, Margaret, Lisa, others behind them. A corridor of dead women stretching back decades. We're not ghosts, Catherine said. Her voice clear now, crystalline. We're warnings, we're evidence, we're the women the institution tried to erase. Remember us, Margaret whispered. Testify, Lisa commanded. The corridor filled with light. Not the harsh light of the box. Something else. Ashley felt herself floating, disconnecting. The drug pulling her under. Her last conscious thought. They're killing me, not quickly. Not obviously. But this is murder disguised as treatment. Then darkness. Different from the box's darkness. This was chemical, enforced. A darkness that came from inside, from neurons misfiring, from consciousness interrupted mid-sentence. When she woke, hours later. Days? She was back in the box, alone. The walls weeping their condensation tears. But scratched into the concrete near where her head had rested during the forced sedation. Fresh marks. Like someone had used a fingernail or small stone. They killed me too. Room 217, June 1972. Tell them, Clara, Ashley's blood froze. June 1972. That was next month. That was future. That was impossible. Unless time in the box didn't work linearly. Unless trauma opened perceptions that consciousness normally filtered. Unless. She pressed her palm against the scratches. They felt real, sharp, recent. Somewhere in this building, a woman named Clara would die next month. Room 217. Ashley had 42 more days in the box ahead of her, and a growing certainty that if she didn't escape, her name would join the list of ghosts warning future prisoners. The walls whispered, "Remember us. Remember us. Remember." She whispered back, "I will. I swear I will." The darkness pressed closer. The hunger deepened. The isolation continued its grinding work. But Ashley Sella was no longer just a victim. She was becoming a witness, a recorder, a living archive of crimes the institution thought it had buried. And archives, unlike ghosts, could testify in court. June 4th, 1972, day 62. The box opened, not for release, for transfer. Ashley could barely stand when the attendants extracted her, legs atrophied, vision struggling to process light after 2 months of controlled darkness. Weight, 92 pounds. The smock hung on her frame like burial shroud on skeleton. They carried her to Ward D, not gently. Efficiency without care. Deposited her on a cot in the communal sleeping area, 20 beds arranged in rows, close enough that women could hear each other breathe, far enough that touching required intention. Rosa found her first. Patient, 39107. 17 months had become 19 now. "You survived the box." Not quite admiration in her voice, something more complex, recognition. "Most don't come back the same." Ashley's voice emerged rusted. "How many don't come back at all?" 3 this year. Official cause, suicide. Actual cause, pick one. Starvation, dehydration, sepsis from untreated infections, or simple despair. Rosa's eyes held the flat affect of someone who'd witnessed too many erasures. "You look like you've seen ghosts." "Maybe I have." Over the following days, strength returned incrementally. The body remembered how to be a body. Walk, sit, chew the institutional food that tasted like cardboard soaked in defeat. But something had changed. The box had stripped away whatever remained of Ashley's faith in official channels, legitimate process, the possibility that truth alone could save her. She needed evidence, physical, undeniable, the kind that couldn't be dismissed as delusion. Ward D held 43 women. Diagnoses varied: hysteria, nymphomania, moral insanity, melancholia, schizophrenia. But the common thread was visibility. Each woman had seen something, known something, or simply been something that threatened someone with power. Patient 28412, Margaret Fisher. The woman from Ashley's visions, real, alive, diminished, 61 years old now, 18 years institutionalized. She shuffled in circles, muttering numbers. Medication had carved away large portions of her cognition, but in rare lucid moments she remembered. "My husband," she whispered one night when Ashley sat beside her. "Richard Fisher, orthopedic surgeon, wanted to marry his surgical nurse. Committed me instead, cheaper than divorce. I knew where he hid money. Offshore accounts, tax evasion. I was going to testify in court." Her eyes focused briefly, sharp as broken glass. "They took my memories with electroshock, but I remember feelings. I remember being someone who mattered." Patient 33118, Dorothy Kern, 68 years old. Former accountant. Discovered embezzlement at the firm where she worked. 22 years at Ashford. No family, no visitors. Just existence measured in pills dispensed and meals consumed. Patient 40215, Sarah Brennan, 24 years old. Diagnosed nymphomaniac. Actual story. Gang raped by 3 men including a state senator's son. When she reported it, the senator had her committed. Sexually deviant behavior with paranoid accusations. She'd been here 11 months. They'd sterilized her in month 3. Therapeutic intervention for hypersexuality. Ashley documented everything. Not on paper, that would be confiscated. She memorized, created elaborate mental filing systems, each woman's story encoded in detail. She also searched for Clara. Room 217, the name scratched in the box, the warning from what seemed like the future. Room 217 existed. 4th floor, isolation wing. Patient 45521, Clara Whitmore, 29 years old, former journalist, investigated police corruption, committed 3 weeks ago under diagnosis of delusional disorder with grandiose ideation. Ashley managed to glimpse her once during a supervised corridor walk. Thin, bruised, eyes that held the particular terror of someone who'd just realized what happened to inconvenient women. They made eye contact for exactly 3 seconds before an attendant separated them. But 3 seconds was enough. Clara mouthed 2 words. "Help me." The network formed slowly, carefully. Women learned to communicate without speaking. A touch on the shoulder meant safe to talk. Eye contact held 2 seconds too long meant listen. Sharing food meant I trust you. Rosa became the connector. She'd been there longest among the younger patients, knew which attendants accepted bribes, which nurses felt guilty enough to look the other way, which doctors actually read patient files versus just signing prescriptions. "There's a storage room," Rosa whispered during a rare moment of privacy in the bathroom. "3rd floor, medical records. Old files they haven't digitized. If we could access it, we'd have proof," Ashley finished. "Names, dates, pattern of illegal commitments. Also dangerous. They catch us, it's the box, or worse." Worse than the box? Rosa's silence was answer enough. The plan developed over weeks. Patient 36609. Judith Ramos, pharmacist, committed for reporting pharmaceutical fraud. Could sometimes access the medication room during distribution. She'd steal blank prescription sheets. Patient 31914, Ann Sullivan, former locksmith's daughter, committed for kleptomania after shoplifting to feed her children. Could pick basic locks. But they needed timing, coordination, and they needed someone willing to risk everything. Ashley volunteered. She'd already survived the box, had already died in all the ways that mattered. What remained was just flesh and determination. July 12, 1972. Night shift. Attendant Morris worked Thursdays. He drank, which meant he slept. Nurse Chen supervised. She was sympathetic, turned her back when it mattered. Anne picked the storage room lock in 47 seconds. Ashley entered alone. Rows of filing cabinets. Decades of records. She had maybe 10 minutes. She found it in cabinet MZ, Margaret Fisher's file. Commitment papers signed by husband Richard and Dr. Harold Voss. Diagnosis, erotic mania. Treatment log, electroconvulsive therapy, 47 sessions. Notes in Voss's handwriting. Patient shows persistent belief in false accusations against husband. Memory disruption proceeding as planned. Clara Whitmore's file, 3 weeks old. Admission notes. Patient claims to be investigative journalist. Paranoid beliefs about police department. Dangerous to self and public order. Her own file. Ashley Sela, 47219. The diagnosis Voss had written. Acute hysterical psychosis manifesting as conspiracy delusions regarding medical establishment. Recommend indefinite commitment. Patient shows no insight into illness. High risk of violence if released. She photographed nothing, cameras were impossible. But she memorized. Specific words, exact phrasing. The handwriting styles, the signatures, voices in the corridor, footsteps. Ashley grabbed one more file, random. Patient 28816, Patricia Downing. Committed 1965, died 1967. Cause suicide by hanging. But the autopsy notes, barely legible, filed in error, showed bruising inconsistent with hanging. Manner of death, undetermined. Investigation, closed. Murder disguised as suicide. Evidence buried in misfiled paperwork. The footsteps grew closer. Ashley fled. Anne locked the door behind them. They returned to Ward D separately, hearts hammering. That night, Ashley shared what she'd found, whispered in darkness to the women whose stories she now carried. "We're not crazy," she said. "We're witnesses. And they're terrified of what we know." Rosa gripped her hand. "What do? We survive, we remember. And when the time comes, we testify." The next morning, Clara Whitmore was found unresponsive in room 217. Official cause: heart attack. She was 29 years old. No autopsy performed. Body cremated within 48 hours. Ashley stood at the window, watching smoke rise from the incinerator chimney. Another woman erased. Another crime buried. But this time, witnesses remained, and witnesses remembered. And memory, properly archived, became evidence that could outlive institutional power. The alliance solidified in grief, and in the dark corners of Ashford, women began planning not just survival, but escape. And more than escape: exposure. The walls had whispered warnings. Now they would scream accusations. But first, they had to live long enough to be heard. August 3rd, 1972. 5 months since Ashley's arrival, Clara Whitmore had been dead 3 weeks. Her cremated remains sent to no one, no family claimed, no funeral held. Just another filing cabinet closure. Patient 45521, deceased. Next case. But Clara's death had shifted something. The women of Ward D stopped pretending this was temporary, stopped believing that compliance meant eventual release. The illusion dissolved like sugar in rain. Ashley's weight had stabilized at 101 pounds. Still gaunt, but functional. She'd learned the rhythms of institutional life. Morning medication at 6 a.m. She'd perfected the technique of holding pills under her tongue, spitting them later into the toilet. Breakfast at 7. Mandatory group therapy at 9, where Dr. Voss asked leading questions designed to produce confirming evidence of diagnosis. "Do you still believe the hospital is conspiring against you?" Yes meant delusional. No meant delusional with diminished insight. The plan had been forming for weeks, whispered in bathroom stalls, coded in glances, mapped in stolen moments. The East Wing service entrance was the weakness, used for laundry deliveries Tuesdays and Fridays. 6 p.m. The attendant who supervised, Morris, smoked during unloading. 15 minutes of distraction. The door locked from outside but not inside. Old mechanism. Anne could manipulate it, but escape required more than open door. It required documents, money, somewhere to run. The outside world didn't recognize institutional kidnapping. A woman in a hospital gown wandering the streets would be returned, medicated more heavily, buried deeper. Rosa had a sister in Syracuse, estranged but alive, an address committed to memory. "She doesn't know I'm here. Our parents told her I moved to California. If you can reach her, tell her the truth, she'll help." Judith knew a reporter, Buffalo Chronicle, had published articles critical of psychiatric institutions. Edward Sawyer. He covered Willowbrook before Rivera. He'll listen, but you need evidence. Testimony alone won't work. They'll just call you a former patient, unreliable witness. Ashley had memorized file contents, but memory wasn't evidence a newspaper could print. She needed physical proof. July 31st. The opportunity arrived accidentally. Nurse Chen, sympathetic Chen who looked away when it mattered, dropped her access keys during medication distribution. Ashley palmed them, returned them 3 hours later with profuse apologies. But not before making wax impressions using candle wax smuggled from the chapel. Anne cast duplicate keys using melted down spoons and the wax molds. Crude but functional. They had 72 hours before key inventory check would reveal the theft. August 3rd. The plan executed at 6:07 p.m. Morris lit his cigarette, leaned against the loading dock. The laundry truck idled. Anne approached the service door from inside. The copied key slid into the lock, turned. Click. Ashley wore clothes stolen from the laundry, civilian clothes unclaimed by discharged patients, jeans, a sweater, shoes that didn't fit but were better than institutional slippers. In her pocket, a list of names, memorized file numbers, dates, specific phrases from medical records. Rosa gripped her shoulders. You have 3 hours before night shift count. Maybe 4 if we fake your presence during bed check. What happens to you when they realize, we know the risks. We're already disappeared. You're the one who can still escape. Dorothy pressed something into Ashley's hand. A small photograph. Faded. My daughter. Before, show her. Tell her I wasn't crazy. Tell her I tried to come home. The corridor stretched long. Ashley moved fast, not running. Running drew attention, but purposeful. Laundry delivery uniform borrowed from an unattended cart. Hair pinned under a cap. Head down. First floor, second, ground level. The service entrance was 15 feet away. You there, stop. Attendant Hayes. Not Morris. Schedule change no one had anticipated. He moved toward her, hand reaching for radio. Ashley didn't think. Instinct. Survival. She grabbed a mop from a cleaning cart. Swung. Not hard enough to seriously injure. She was still a nurse underneath the institutional number, but hard enough. He staggered. Radio clattered. She ran through the service door. Into evening air that tasted like freedom and terror. August heat after months of climate-controlled cold. The shock of it nearly stopped her. Behind, alarm. Shrill, mechanical. The sound of lockdown initiating. The institution sat on a hill. Forest surrounded it. She ran toward trees, away from roads, away from the logical escape routes they'd search first. Branches tore her borrowed clothes. Roots tripped her. Darkness gathered between pines. She ran until lungs burned, until legs threatened collapse, until the alarm faded to distant wail. Then she walked. Hours. Using stars for navigation. North, away from Syracuse, toward smaller towns where a disheveled woman might draw less immediate attention. Around midnight, she reached a gas station. Closed. But a payphone outside. She had no money, but collect calls were possible. Rosa's sister, Syracuse number memorized. The phone rang 6 times. Hello? Suspicious voice. Late call. My name is Ashley Sella. I'm calling about Rosa Mendez. Your sister, she's alive. She's imprisoned in Ashford Psychiatric Institute. She needs help. This isn't a joke. Please don't hang up. Rosa's in California. My parents said your parents lied or were lied to. She's been at Ashford 19 months, diagnosed nymphomaniac. Real crime. She reported a priest for child abuse. She gave me your number. She said you'd help. Silence. Long enough that Ashley thought the connection had dropped. Then, where are you? Ashley gave the gas station address. Read it from the sign illuminated by single floodlight. Stay there. I'm coming. 20 minutes. The woman, Maria Mendez, arrived in 18 minutes. Late 20s. Rosa's eyes in a different face. She pulled up in a Honda Civic, passenger door already open. Get in. We're going to Buffalo. I know people. Advocates. They deal with psychiatric abuse cases. The drive took 3 hours. Ashley told her everything. The box, the deaths, Clara, Margaret, the files. The pattern of using psychiatry as weapon against inconvenient women. Maria didn't speak. Just drove. Knuckles white on steering wheel. Buffalo, a small apartment building. 4th floor. Maria knocked a specific rhythm. The door opened to reveal Edward Sawyer. 50s. Tired eyes that had seen too much institutional evil. You were right, Maria told him. Everything you suspected about Ashford. She has details. Sawyer looked at Ashley. Really looked. You escaped tonight? 6 hours ago. They'll be searching. They have police contacts, judges. You're not safe yet. I know, but I have names. Dates, specific medical records, contents, proof of illegal commitments, unauthorized procedures, suspicious deaths. I can testify. Testimony from a psychiatric patient won't hold up. You need corroboration, documents, other witnesses willing to come forward. Ashley's exhaustion hit like physical weight. The adrenaline that had sustained her drained away, leaving only bone-deep fatigue. There are women still there, still trapped. If I testify and they suppress it, those women will die. Like Clara, like Patricia Downing, like dozens more whose names I don't even know. Sawyer nodded slowly. Then we don't just expose Ashford, we expose the system. The network of institutions doing this. It'll take time, years maybe, building a case that can't be dismissed. I have time. I survived the box. I can survive anything else. Maria made up a couch. Ashley collapsed onto it. First sleep outside institutional control in 5 months. She dreamed of the box, of walls weeping, of ghost women whispering. But this time she whispered back, I kept my promise, I'm remembering. I'm testifying, you won't be forgotten. August 4th, 1972. Morning News reported an escape from Ashford Psychiatric Institute. Patient described as dangerous to herself and others. Public asked to report sightings, phone number provided. But Ashley was already gone, hidden, planning, beginning the long process of building a case. The institution had tried to erase her, had almost succeeded. But erasure requires completion, and Ashley had survived. And survival, properly weaponized, becomes resistance. The walls of Ashford still held captive women. But now, outside those walls, a witness breathed free air. Remembered names, held evidence. The institution had created its own worst nightmare. A woman who escaped with the truth still intact. And truth, once freed, spreads like fire through dried kindling. Ashford's walls would burn. Not literally, but legally, ethically. The slow burn of exposure, of justice delayed but finally arriving. Ashley slept deeply that first night of freedom, dreaming of testimony, of courtrooms, of women walking out of institutions into sunlight, dreaming of the day when the box would be photographed, documented, proven, when the dead would have their names restored, when the survivors would be believed. The escape was complete, but the real work was just beginning. September 1972 to March 1973. The outside world moved differently than the box. Time acquired meaning again. Seasons, dates, progression toward goals instead of endless repetition. Edward Sawyer worked methodically. Journalist instincts honed by decades of institutional investigations. He'd covered Willowbrook State School before Geraldo Rivera made it famous. Had documented abuse in orphanages, prisons, veterans' hospitals. Ashford was different, more sophisticated, better camouflaged. They're using legitimate psychiatric terminology, Sawyer explained, spreading documents across his kitchen table. September 15th, 1972, 3 weeks after Ashley's escape. That's the protection. Who questions a doctor's diagnosis? Who second-guesses commitment papers signed by physicians and family members? Ashley sat across from him, still thin but recovering. Maria had provided sanctuary, a room in her apartment, food, safety. The women I left behind, we need to get them out. We will, but if we move too fast, Ashford shreds evidence, transfers patients, disappears the worst cases. We need to build pressure gradually, media attention, legal investigation, then extraction. The first article ran October 3rd, 1972. Buffalo Chronicle, page 12. Small headline. Former patient alleges abuse at psychiatric facility. Sawyer kept it contained, deliberately limited. Testing response. Ashford's lawyers sent a cease and desist within 48 hours. Threatened lawsuit. Character assassination. Ashley's psychiatric records. Carefully edited. Leaked to newspapers. Delusional. History of paranoid ideation. Violent episode during escape. But Sawyer had anticipated this. His second article ran October 17th. Institutional retaliation. How psychiatric records become weapons. It detailed the circular logic. Speak truth about abuse. Get diagnosed as delusional. Have diagnosis used to discredit testimony. Something shifted. Letters began arriving. First trickle, then flood. A woman in Rochester whose sister had died at Ashford. Official cause suicide. But the sister had never shown suicidal ideation. Had written letters describing forced medication, unexplained procedures. A former nurse at Ashford who'd quit in 1969. Couldn't stay silent anymore. Confirmed experimental drug trials. Patients used without consent. Deaths unreported or misclassified. A family in Syracuse. Daughter committed in 1965 for promiscuity. Real reason: pregnancy out of wedlock. She'd been sterilized within months, now released but damaged. Memory gaps, tremors, the lasting effects of electroshock. By December 1972, Sawyer had 17 corroborating testimonies. Not enough for legal action. Statute of limitations, jurisdictional complications, institutional protections. But enough for sustained media pressure. January 1973. The New York State Department of Mental Hygiene announced a routine audit of Ashford. Translation: someone with authority was finally paying attention. Inside Ashford, panic spread like contagion among administrators. Ashley heard this later, from Rosa, who was eventually released. How files disappeared. How certain patients were transferred to other institutions. How Dr. Voss spent days shredding documents in his office, smoke from the incinerator running constantly. But institutions are bureaucracies. Bureaucracies generate copies. Records persist in unexpected places. A filing error means documents survive in the wrong cabinet. A clerk makes duplicates for personal insurance. A nurse keeps logs at home, evidence against the day she might need legal protection. The audit team arrived February 12, 1973. Federal investigators supplementing state review. Someone in Washington had gotten interested, possibly connected to post-Watergate sensitivity about institutional corruption, possibly genuine concern. Results were what mattered, not motivation. They found evidence not everything Voss had been thorough, but enough. The box, undeniable. Medical records showing unauthorized procedures. Financial records indicating pharmaceutical company payments. Death certificates with suspicious patterns. Too many natural causes among women under 40. March 8, 1973. Ashford Psychiatric Institute suspended new admissions pending investigation. Dr. Harlan Voss placed on administrative leave. Nurse Evelyn Thorpe transferred to different facility. Director Marcus Klein, now revealed to be associated with Ashford through Shell Corporation ownership, resigned, but no arrests, not yet. Institutional law moved glacially. Evidence had to be ironclad. Testimonies coordinated. Prosecutors convinced that cases were winnable. Ashley met with New York Attorney General's office, March 15, 1973. Exactly 1 year after she'd witnessed the envelope exchange in Youngstown. The symmetry felt intentional, though chance likely explained it. The prosecutor, Janet Morrison, 43, first female senior prosecutor in the office, listened without interruption. 3 hours of testimony. Ashley had prepared, had organized memories into chronological narrative, had learned to present horror without drowning in it. "This is actionable," Morrison said finally. "But we need the women still inside Ashford willing to testify. Can you get them to trust us?" Ashley thought of Rosa, Margaret, Dorothy, Sarah, the network of witnesses still trapped. If you guarantee protection, if you promise their testimony won't be used against them, if you treat them as victims, not patients. Morrison nodded slowly. "I can guarantee that, but we need to move carefully. Institutional abuse cases are notoriously difficult. Defense will argue the women are unreliable witnesses because of their diagnoses. That's the whole point. They're diagnosed to make them unreliable. The diagnosis is the crime. I understand, and I believe you. But I'm thinking about what a jury will believe. We need your testimony as the primary witness. You're articulate, educated, escaped before long-term damage. We need the other women to corroborate pattern. And we need documentary evidence to prove systematic abuse." The case built slowly. Spring 1973. Summer. Fall. Each woman extracted from Ashford told similar stories. Different details, but same structure. Inconvenient woman, fabricated diagnosis, institutional disposal. Rosa, released in May 1973, reunited with Maria, began the long process of reclaiming identity stolen by 19 months of captivity. Margaret Fisher, released in July, 18 years institutional, mind damaged but testimony usable. She remembered her husband, remembered the offshore accounts, remembered enough to implicate him in conspiracy. Sarah Brennan released in August. The senator's son who'd orchestrated her gang rape had since died in car accident. Convenient, suspicious, but it meant Sarah could testify without retaliation. By October 1973, 23 women had come forward. Different institutions. Ashford wasn't unique, just particularly egregious. The case expanded beyond single facility to systemic indictment. Watergate dominated headlines. Nixon's presidency crumbling. In that climate of institutional distrust, stories about psychiatric abuse found receptive audience. People were primed to believe that authorities lied, that systems were corrupt, that power protected itself at expense of the vulnerable. December 1973. Grand jury convened. 23 women testified. Ashley first, Rosa second. Then the others, pattern emerging like photographic negative developing. The indictments came down January 14, 1974. Dr. Harlan Voss, 47 counts including involuntary manslaughter, battery, conspiracy, fraud. Evelyn Thorpe, 23 counts including conspiracy, evidence tampering, accessory to assault. Marcus Klein, 31 counts including racketeering, fraud, conspiracy, negligent homicide. No trial date yet. Legal maneuvering would take years. But the indictments meant official acknowledgement. The state admitting these crimes had occurred. The women's testimonies validated. Ashley stood outside the courthouse. January cold. Snow beginning to fall. Reporters surrounded her asking questions she'd prepared for. How do you feel? Relieved, exhausted, angry that it took this long, grateful for every woman brave enough to testify. Do you think justice will be served? I think truth has been told. Whether that becomes justice depends on what happens next. But the women who died at Ashford, Clara Whitmore, Patricia Downing, Catherine Howell, and dozens more whose names we're still uncovering, they have witnesses now. They're not forgotten anymore. The cameras clicked. The story would run in papers across the state. Some national pickup. Not front page, never front page, but visible. Documented, part of public record. Ashley returned to Buffalo, to Maria's apartment, to the life she was slowly building. She'd enrolled in community college, finishing her nursing degree properly, planning to work in psychiatric reform, turning survival into purpose. The phone rang late that night. Edward Sawyer. You should know. The federal investigation expanded. They're looking at pharmaceutical companies now, following the money. Your testimony about the drug trials, it's connecting to larger patterns. Corporate liability. This is getting bigger than Ashford. Ashley felt something unlock in her chest. Not quite hope, more like vindication. The conspiracy she'd glimpsed in Youngstown had been real, larger than she'd imagined, and now, finally, being investigated. The women I left in the box, she said. The ghosts. They were right, this goes deeper. All the way down, Sawyer confirmed. We're just starting to see how deep. After the call ended, Ashley sat in the dark apartment. Outside, Buffalo slept under snow. Inside, she held her journal, the one she'd started keeping again after escape. Writing names, dates, memories before they faded. On the last page, she'd copied the fragments found in the box. Catherine's warning, Lisa's testimony, Margaret's plea to be remembered. Clara's final message. She added her own entry. January 14, 1974, indictment served. The walls are cracking. Light is reaching places that were meant to stay dark forever. For the women who didn't survive, I testify, I remember. I keep my promise. The box tried to erase us. The institution tried to silence us, but we were witnesses. And witnesses, if they survive, eventually speak. The truth is out now. Imperfect, incomplete, but out. And once released, truth can't be recaptured. It spreads, it grows, it demands response. Ashford will fall, not tomorrow, but eventually. And when it does, every woman who suffered there will be vindicated. We were never crazy. We were never wrong. We were inconvenient truths in a system built on convenient lies. And now the world knows. She closed the journal. Tomorrow would bring more testimonies, more legal preparation, more slow-grinding work of justice. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel what she'd earned, the knowledge that she'd kept faith with the dead, that the silenced were silent no more. The trial began October 7th, 2001, 29 years after Ashley's escape. 27 years of legal maneuvering, appeals, jurisdictional disputes, evidence gathering, witness protection, and institutional resistance finally culminating in a courtroom in Syracuse, New York. The delay wasn't accidental. Defense attorneys for Voss, Thorpe, and Klein had employed every tactical postponement available. Motions to dismiss, challenges to evidence admissibility, witness intimidation disguised as legitimate investigation, the machinery of institutional protection grinding slowly, attempting to exhaust plaintiffs into abandonment. But Ashley hadn't abandoned. Neither had the other survivors. They'd aged alongside their case, Ashley, now 57, hair graying at temples, face lined with decades of advocacy work. She'd become a psychiatric reform consultant, testified before state legislatures, published a memoir in 1989 titled The Box, A Survivor's Testament. The book had sold modestly but steadily, keeping Ashford's crimes in public consciousness. The courtroom was federal. Judge Catherine Brennan presiding, no relation to Sarah Brennan, though the nominal coincidence felt symbolically appropriate. Prosecutor Janet Morrison had retired. Her successor, David Chen, carried the case with the weight of institutional memory. The defendants sat at separate tables, legal strategy dictating distance. Dr. Harlan Voss, now 92, wheelchair-bound, oxygen tube feeding his labored breathing, still alive when so many of his patients were decades dead. Evelyn Thorpe, 78, face collapsed into deep creases, eyes that refused to meet anyone's gaze. Marcus Klein, 81, maintaining the posture of respectability even in indictment, expensive suit, manicured hands folded calmly. The prosecution's opening statement lasted 43 minutes. Chen methodical, building timeline from 1958 to 1973, documenting pattern across 15 years, unauthorized medical experiments, fraudulent commitments, suspicious deaths, financial kickbacks from pharmaceutical corporations. The defense will argue these were different times, Chen said, voice carrying courtroom authority. That psychiatric standards have evolved. That what seems abusive now was accepted practice then. But the evidence will show these defendants knew they were committing crimes. They destroyed documents, falsified records, silenced witnesses through institutionalization. They weaponized psychiatry deliberately, systematically, for profit and protection of powerful interests. Ashley testified on day 3, October 10th, 2001. She'd prepared for this moment for 29 years. Her testimony lasted 6 hours across 2 days. She described Youngstown, the envelope exchange, her letter to the newspaper, the retaliatory commitment. Every detail documented, corroborated by records Chen's team had finally extracted from sealed archives. She described the box, the 62 days, the starvation, the sensory deprivation, the physical deterioration from 128 pounds to 92. Medical records confirmed the weight loss, though Voss's notes had classified it as therapeutic intervention for hysterical obesity delusions. Did you believe you were experiencing delusions while in the box? Defense attorney Michael Strauss asked during cross-examination, voice carrying practiced skepticism. No, I believed I was being tortured, which I was. But you've described conversations with deceased patients, visions, hallucinations induced by isolation. I described psychological trauma manifesting as sensory phenomena, my mind creating companionship in total isolation. That's not delusion. That's survival mechanism. The delusion was the diagnosis used to imprison me. Strauss tried another approach. You were found to have stolen medication logs, photographed confidential documents, engaged in paranoid surveillance of hospital staff. I documented crimes. That's not paranoia. That's witnessing. The exchange continued, Strauss attempting to paint Ashley as unreliable, her memories corrupted by trauma and time. But Chen's preparation held. Ashley remained consistent, detailed, unshakable. Rosa testified day 6. Margaret Fisher day 7. Her memory damaged but testimony powerful in its fragmentation. The gaps themselves evidence of what electroshock had stolen. Sarah Brennan day 8, describing the gang rape, the retaliatory commitment, the forced sterilization. 23 women total. Some dead now, their video depositions played for the jury. Voices from beyond grave testifying to institutional violence. The defense strategy centered on historical context. Standards were different. Psychiatric practice has evolved. These physicians acted within accepted parameters of their time. But Chen countered with internal documents finally unsealed. Voss's personal notes describing the box as punitive isolation, not therapy. Correspondence between Klein and pharmaceutical executives discussing expendable patient populations for drug trials. Thorpe's log noting falsified commitment papers per Dr. V's instruction. The evidence was damning, not circumstantial, not ambiguous. Direct documentation of conspiracy. The trial lasted 11 weeks. Defense called expert witnesses, psychiatrists who testified about historical context, evolution of medical ethics, the complexity of diagnosing mental illness. But prosecution countered with their own experts, with the physical evidence of the box. Photographed, measured, presented as Exhibit 47, November 20th, 2001. Closing arguments. Chen spoke last. The defendants claim they were products of their time, but their own documents prove they knew these actions were criminal. They hid evidence. They destroyed records. They silenced witnesses not through legitimate medical intervention, but through deliberate abuse. Catherine Howell, lobotomized and dead at 34. Patricia Downing, murdered and classified as suicide. Clara Whitmore, killed at 29 and cremated within 48 hours. These women and dozens more were not patients. They were victims, and the defendants were not healers. They were criminals who used medical authority as weapon. The jury deliberated for 62 hours, symbolic echo of Ashley's time in the box, though no one acknowledged the coincidence officially. December 3rd, 2001, verdict. Dr. Harlan Voss, guilty on 43 counts. Crimes against humanity, involuntary manslaughter, conspiracy, fraud. Evelyn Thorpe, guilty on 19 counts. Conspiracy, evidence tampering, accessory to assault, and negligent homicide. Marcus Klein, guilty on 28 counts. Racketeering, fraud, conspiracy, negligent homicide. The courtroom remained silent as Judge Brennan read the verdict. No gasps, no celebration. Just the weight of justice arriving 3 decades late. Sentencing occurred January 15, 2002. Life imprisonment for all 3 defendants. No parole eligibility. Ashley sat in the gallery, surrounded by other survivors. Rosa gripped her hand. Margaret wept quietly. Sarah stared forward, face unreadable. When the defendants were led away, Voss in wheelchair, Thorpe leaning on walker, Klein still maintaining dignity despite handcuffs, Ashley felt something release. Not quite satisfaction. Not quite closure. Something more complex, accountability. Finally, after 29 years, outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. Ashley had prepared a statement. This verdict doesn't return the years stolen from us. Doesn't resurrect the women who died in Ashford's cells. Doesn't erase the trauma embedded in our bodies and minds. But it establishes truth. It validates our testimonies. It proves that women who speak truth to power, even when that power uses psychiatry as weapon, can eventually be heard, believed, vindicated. For Catherine Howell, for Patricia Downing, for Clara Whitmore, for every woman whose name we're still uncovering from erased records. This verdict says, you mattered. Your lives had value. The crimes committed against you were real. And to any institution still using diagnosis as disposal, commitment as silencing, we're watching. We're documenting. And eventually we will testify. The cameras recorded. The statement would run in newspapers across the country. Not front page, still not front page, but documented. Part of permanent record. Ashley returned to her hotel room that night, opened her journal. The same one she'd kept for 29 years. Added final entry to the case, January 15, 2002. Justice served. Not perfect, not complete, but real. The box is now evidence in criminal case, photographed. Measured, proven. The ghosts can rest now. Or maybe they never rest. Maybe they just witness from whatever place the dead occupy, seeing their truth finally acknowledged. I kept my promise. I remembered. I testified. I survived long enough to see them convicted. The work isn't finished. There are other institutions, other victims, other walls that need exposing. But tonight, for the women of Ashford, there is vindication. We were witnesses, and witnesses when they survive, when they persist, when they refuse erasure, eventually change history. She closed the journal. Tomorrow would bring more advocacy, more testimonies for other cases, more work. But tonight she allowed herself to feel what she'd earned, the knowledge that the box had been opened, examined, condemned. That institutional violence had been named and punished. That silence had been broken permanently. The trial was over, the convictions secured, the names remembered. And in the archive of American injustice, Ashford Psychiatric Institute would stand forever as evidence of what happens when psychiatry becomes weapon, when diagnosis becomes imprisonment, when women's voices are systematically erased. And also evidence that erasure, however thorough, can never be complete, because witnesses remember. And memory, properly documented, becomes testimony. And testimony eventually becomes justice. December 21st, 2025. Ashley Sella died peacefully in her sleep at age 81. Natural causes. Surrounded by chosen family, Rosa, now 76, and Maria, 80. The obituaries ran in major newspapers, finally front page in some. Psychiatric reform pioneer dies, survivor who exposed institutional abuse. But her story didn't end with death. Stories like hers never do. They ripple forward, touching lives she'd never meet, inspiring reforms she'd never witness, existing as permanent challenge to institutional power. The archive remained. That was her final gift. In 2003, 1 year after the convictions, Ashley had donated her papers to Cornell University's Division of Rare and Manuscript Collections. 47 boxes. Journals from 1972 onward. Correspondence with other survivors. Legal documents. Photographs of the box taken during trial evidence gathering. Medical records extracted through decades of Freedom of Information requests. Audio recordings of testimonies. Video depositions of women who died before seeing justice. The Ashley Sella collection became resource for historians, journalists, advocates, filmmakers. Graduate students wrote dissertations about institutional psychiatry using her documentation. Documentaries featured her testimony. Her memoir remained in print, taught in university courses on medical ethics, women's history, psychiatric reform. But the deeper legacy lived in policy change. In 2004, New York State passed the Psychiatric Patient Protection Act, nicknamed Ashley's Law. It mandated independent review of all involuntary commitments within 72 hours by non-institutional psychiatrists, patient right to legal representation at commitment hearings, prohibition of sensory deprivation as therapeutic intervention, mandatory reporting of suspicious deaths to external oversight boards, criminal penalties for falsified psychiatric diagnoses. Other states followed. By 2010, 37 states had enacted similar protections. Not perfect. Institutional abuse still occurred, but harder now. More visible, more accountable. The Ashford building itself became museum. In 2008, the Institute of Psychiatric Reform purchased the abandoned facility, preserved it as memorial and educational site. Visitors could tour the box, that 2-by-3-meter cell where Ashley had spent 62 days. Could read the fragments she'd found in walls, now protected behind glass. could see photographs of the 43 women who testified, their faces restored to public memory. A wall of names listed every woman documented to have died at Ashford between 1958 and 1973. 73 names. Some marked suspicious circumstances, others simply marked forgotten until now. Catherine Howell, Patricia Downing, Clara Whitmore, and 70 others, no longer erased. The museum's mission statement, written partially by Ashley before her death: memory is resistance, documentation is defiance, witnessing is revolution. Here, we remember the women institutional power tried to erase. We document the crimes that bureaucracy tried to bury. We witness on behalf of those who were silenced, and we warn: vigilance is eternal. Abuse adapts. Power protects itself. Only sustained memory prevents repetition. Rosa became the museum's first director. She'd spent the years after trial becoming licensed social worker, specializing in psychiatric patient advocacy. She guided tours personally, telling her story and Ashley's, refusing to let the next generation forget. "This is where I spent 19 months, she'd tell visitors in Ward D, diagnosed nymphomaniac for reporting child abuse. This is where they took my name, replaced it with patient number 39107. This is where I learned that psychiatry could be weapon as easily as healing. And this is where I survived, with other women, forming alliances that eventually brought down the institution that tried to destroy us. The educational programs reached thousands: high school students, medical students, law students, nursing students, anyone whose profession might grant them power over vulnerable people. The warning was consistent: authority without accountability becomes abuse. Diagnosis without appeal becomes imprisonment. Silence enforced becomes violence. The dead doctors left different legacies. Dr. Harlan Voss died in prison 2009, age 99. No obituary. No funeral. Body donated to medical school. Ironic endpoint for man who'd treated bodies as experimental material. Evelyn Thorpe died in prison 2011, age 88. Her daughter, estranged for decades, gave single interview to Buffalo Chronicle. "My mother was complicit in horror. I cannot forgive that. I can only witness it, name it, and commit to different choices." Marcus Klein died in prison 2015, age 95. His financial empire, built partially on pharmaceutical kickbacks, dissolved in legal settlements. The money funded psychiatric patient advocacy organizations. His name became synonymous with institutional corruption. But beyond individual consequences, the case established precedent. Institutions could be held accountable. Psychiatric abuse was prosecutable. Women's testimonies about institutional violence were credible, valuable, legally actionable. Other cases followed. Other institutions investigated. Other survivors found courage to testify, citing Ashley's case as template. By 2025, over 200 psychiatric facilities had faced legal action for abuses committed between 1950 and 1990. 47 resulted in convictions, hundreds more in settlements and policy changes. The work continued. Because abuse continued, it adapted, evolved, found new forms. Private psychiatric hospitals with financial incentives to extend stays. Immigration detention centers using psychiatric diagnosis to silence detainees. Nursing homes warehousing elderly patients with chemical restraints. The same patterns in different institutional clothing. But resistance continued too. Advocates trained in Ashley's methods document everything, build networks, testify collectively, persist beyond institutional patience for suppression. Ashley's funeral, December 28, 2025, drew hundreds. Fellow survivors, advocates, journalists, students whose dissertations she'd advised, filmmakers whose documentaries she'd consulted on. Rosa delivered eulogy. Ashley used to say she survived the box through memory. By holding on to names, dates, details when the institution wanted her to forget everything, including herself. She transformed survival into testimony. Testimony into justice. Justice into systemic change. But more than that, She taught us that witnessing is sacred duty, that remembering is political act, that speaking truth about institutional violence, even when that truth is dismissed as delusion, is revolutionary. She kept faith with the dead, with Catherine and Patricia and Clara and 70 others whose names she carried for decades. And now we keep faith with her, by continuing the work, by remaining vigilant, by refusing to let institutional power operate in darkness. The box tried to erase her. It failed. Her voice echoes in every reformed law, every protected patient, every testimony that's believed instead of dismissed. She was witness. And witnesses, when they persist, when they document, when they refuse silence, they change the world. The burial was private, small cemetery outside Buffalo. Her headstone simple. Ashley Sella, 1944-2025, nurse, survivor, witness. I remembered them all. But the legacy lived in the 47 boxes at Cornell, the museum at Ashford, the laws protecting psychiatric patients, the advocates trained in her methods, the documentaries featuring her testimony, the university courses teaching her case, the survivors who found courage through her example, and in something less tangible, but equally permanent, the cultural shift in how institutional claims were received, the healthy skepticism towards psychiatric diagnosis used to silence, the insistence on independent verification, the recognition that authority could lie, that institutions protected themselves, that the vulnerable needed structural protection against those who claimed to help them. On the wall of the Ashford Museum, in the room that once housed the box, a final quote from Ashley's last interview, recorded 3 months before her death. People ask if I've healed from the trauma. The answer is, trauma doesn't heal. It transforms. It becomes something you carry differently. For me, it became purpose. The box tried to break me. Instead, it revealed what I was made of. Memory, resistance, refusal to be erased. I survived, but more importantly, I witnessed. I documented, I testified, and those actions rippled beyond my individual experience to touch systems, laws, institutions. That's the real revenge against the box. It tried to make me disappear. Instead, it made me indelible. My testimony exists in legal record, in museum archives, in reformed policies. The institution that tried to erase me is now itself erased, its building preserved only as warning. So to anyone suffering institutional abuse right now, document everything. Remember names, build alliances. Your testimony matters. Your voice has value. Survival itself is resistance. And if you persist long enough, your truth will outlive the institution trying to suppress it. The walls tried to silence us, but witnesses remember, and memory, properly archived, becomes eternal. The recording played on loop in the museum. Visitors stood listening, some crying, some taking notes, all bearing witness to witnessing. Ashley's voice, preserved digitally, speaking truth across time. The box had been dark, silent, designed to erase, but memory proved stronger than erasure. Documentation proved stronger than suppression. Truth proved stronger than institutional power. And in that museum, in those archives, in those reformed laws and protected patients and emboldened advocates, Ashley Sella remained present, not as ghost, as foundation, as precedent, as proof that women who witness institutional violence, who survive it, who document it, who testify about it, those women can change history. The work continued. The vigilance persisted. The memory remained active, because institutional power never stops seeking ways to silence inconvenient voices, and resistance never stops finding ways to make those voices heard. Ashley's life had been the bridge between silence and testimony, between erasure and documentation, between victimhood and witness, and that bridge, now permanent, allowed countless others to cross from suffering to survival to systemic change. The box had been real. The torture had been real. The deaths had been real. But so was the resistance. So was the testimony. so was the justice. And so, most enduringly, was the memory. A world that tried to erase them. Women who never returned remembers.